I've been giving advices since I was a teenager. Good advices, actually. The kind of advice where someone goes quiet for a second because you named the thing they'd be carrying for so long without knowing what to call it. I got good at reading people and their patterns. I got good at seeing the specific shape of whatever lie they were telling themselves. The gap between what they said they wanted and what they kept choosing. But what I couldn't do for most of my life was turn that same eye on myself. I spent a long time trying to understand why, because it's not ignorance. You can know exactly what's happening inside you and still not do a damn thing about it. You can hand someone the precise diagnosis of their own self-destruction and go home that night and repeat the exact same thing. So the knowledge doesn't save you. That's what pissed me off for a long time. It took me a long time to understand that understanding something isn't the same as being free of it. Not even close. I spent years being the person people called. I showed up, I listened, I opened my door when someone had nowhere to go. I sat with people through the kind of nights you don't revisit when the sun comes back up. And I told myself that that was just who I was. That some people move through the world taking, and I was one of the ones who gave. What I didn't see is that I wasn't giving from abundance. I was giving from something closer to fear. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned that being useful was the only version of closeness that felt safe. That if you make yourself needed enough, indispensable enough, people won't have a reason to leave. And guess what? They leave anyway. There was a period in my life where I couldn't be available to anyone. I was completely still. I had no phone calls. I had no one showing up for me. No being whoever somebody needed me to be. Just silence, pure silence. And enough time to find out what I actually meant to the people I'd spent years pouring into. Not what I meant as a person, what I meant as a function. The moment I stopped being useful, more than half of them were gone. And mind you, some didn't just disappear, they made sure of it. People I'd let sleep in my own house, people I carried when they had absolutely nothing. I remember noticing small things in that silence. Whose name didn't appear, which phone stayed quiet, which people I'd have bet my life on, people I'd fed, defended, had apparently decided I was someone they used to know. And look, that didn't hurt the way I expected it to hurt. It was way quieter than that. It was more clarifying than devastating. Like I was finally reading the last line of something you'd been pretending to understand for years. And the interesting part isn't that they left. The interesting part is that I built those dynamics myself, every single one of them. Because I'd spent so long performing this version of myself, the one who's always available, that I'd lost track of where the performance ended and I actually began. And believe me, I'm still not entirely sure I know. Something happened in the last decade that I don't think we're fully reckoned with. We got very good at identifying one kind of broken man. The one who got told to be a man enough times that he stopped having an interior life visible to anyone, including myself. We called it toxic, we criticize it, but there's another version nobody talks about. The man who learned, just as Jung, that the way you survive is not by becoming stoned, but by becoming indispensable. By being so available, so reliably the person with the answer that people can't afford to lose you. And the reason that this version goes unexamined is that it looks good from the outside. It photographs well. It gets called emotional intelligence and maturity. People even celebrate you for it. So you just keep doing it. You keep doing it. You keep performing the generosity and availability. And somewhere in the performance, you lose track of what was real and what you were doing to be loved. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we construct to interface with the world. Not a lie exactly, but more like a socially legible version of yourself that other people can grab onto. So the mask isn't the problem. The problem is when you wear it long enough that you forget you put it on. When the performance becomes the only version of yourself you know how to be. And I wore mine for a long time, believe me. The thing about being the person who gives is that it puts you in an asymmetric position from the start. You know more about the people around you than they know about you. You've listened more than you've been heard. You've offered real honesty that costs something to deliver, and what you've gotten back is a relationship entirely conditional on you continuing to offer it. You give someone of your time when they're in a crisis. You sit with them, you ask the right questions, you say the thing that cuts through, and it lands. And for a moment, the relationship feels genuinely reciprocal, like you're both in it. Then they feel better, and then the dynamic resets. They're not calling you because they miss you. They are calling you because they're in pain, and you've proven you can reduce it. You're not a person in that equation. You're a function they've learned to reach for. And the insidious part that kept me in those dynamics far longer than it should have been is that it feels like connection while it's happening. The intimacy of someone's crisis is real. The vulnerability is real. What isn't real is what it means to them the next morning. Some people don't actually want honesty. They want validation dressed as honesty. They want you to see them clearly enough to reflect back what they already believe about themselves. So the moment you deviate by saying something true they didn't ask for, they don't receive it as care. They feel threatened. They get cold. And if you're built the way I was built, you adjust. You find the version of the truth they can tolerate and you deliver that instead. Because the alternative is losing them. And losing people was the thing you'd organize your entire life to avoid. But that's not the relationship anymore. That's you managing someone. You've stopped being a person and started being a service. And it happens so gradually you don't even notice the shift. You just keep giving and showing up, and then one day you look up and realize that everyone around you knows exactly how to use you, and almost none of them know a damn thing about who you actually are. The loneliest I have ever felt was not when I was alone. It was in rooms full of people who needed me. And you know what's genuinely funny to me? The people who accelerated this dynamic in my life were almost always the ones who spoke loudest about authenticity, who could diagnose their own trauma with clinical precision and then spend the following 3 weeks making that trauma everyone else's problem. Everyone knows this person. They'll tell you they're in a healing era, and what that means in practice is that they've decided their comfort is everyone else's responsibility, and have somehow decided that self-awareness is a personality trait rather than a tool. They talk about nervous system regulation while their nervous system is destabilizing everyone in their vicinity. They announce they're learning to set boundaries while treating your boundaries like a personal attack. And mind you, these people, they are not bad people necessarily. They are not lying when they say they value real connection. What they can't tell you is that real connection to them means someone who stays endlessly interested in their pain without ever being asked to sit with someone else's. So the moment the exchange stops being entirely in their favor, you find out very quickly that the connection was never really about you. They don't do it consciously. They don't sit down and think about how to exploit you. They just follow the warmth, the way anyone follows warmth when they're cold, and they stay until the fire goes out, and then they find another one. And they will have a beautifully articulate explanation for why it was necessary for their growth, while the whole time they'll talk about how much they value genuine connection. And you'll be sitting there wondering how someone who knew that much about healing caused that much damage. Carl Jung wrote about what he called psychic energy. The idea that the mind isn't running on nothing, it's drawing from something finite. Every real interaction costs something. Every time you absorb someone else's chaos and convert it into something they can live with, something real leaves you. And unlike physical exhaustion, you can't always feel it happening. You just noticed one day that you're running on empty and you can't remember the last time you weren't. I treated mine like it was infinite, like I could keep distributing myself and it would regenerate on its own. Guess what? It doesn't. So when it ran dry, when I'd given enough of myself to enough people who were never truly there for me, what I was left with wasn't noble exhaustion. It was a hollowness I couldn't name. Because I've never been taught to treat my own depletion as something worth taking seriously. Other people's pain was always the legitimate emergency. Mine was always something I could deal with later. And guess what? Later never really arrived. Here's the distinction that took me the longest to understand. Silence is not shut down. The version of emotional unavailability that gets handed to men, be cold, stay stone, that's not power. That's what happens when someone has been overwhelmed enough times that they stopped going inward because nothing good was waiting for them there. That's a wound that learned to pass itself off as discipline. But there's another different kind of withdrawal. The one that comes not from being overwhelmed, but from finally understanding what your presence is actually worth, and choosing to stop handing it to people who have no idea what they're holding. And that version of you requires you to sit with yourself in a way that the constant motion of giving never asks you to. When you stop being available, not as a strategy, but because you finally take your own depletion seriously, you find out things you couldn't have found out any other way. The people who remained aren't the ones who needed you. They're the ones who chose you. And that distinction between being needed and being chosen is the entire distance between spending your whole life exhausted and actually building something real. Carl Jung called this the process of becoming fully yourself, individuation. He was clear that it requires a particular kind of aloneness, not the aloneness of someone who got abandoned, but the aloneness of someone who stopped outsourcing their sense of self to other people's need for them. Those two can look identical from the outside. Inside, they're completely different. One of them is a wound, the other is the beginning of something you can't build while you're still performing. And listen, I don't have all of this, I don't have this figured out. This has nothing to do with humility. It's just the plainest true thing I can say. I run a community. As you guys may know, I run a community, I run a YouTube channel, I run my social media, I run a Discord server called The Lighthouse. And people send me real heavy things. And I try to reply to all of them. And sometimes, while I'm writing back to someone, saying exactly the right thing, seeing their situation with complete clarity, I catch myself thinking, why is this easier than saying it to myself? Why can I see this person's pattern in 30 seconds and still go home and repeat my own? I've been asking that question for a while. What I have isn't an answer. What I have is the uncomfortable suspicion that the giving, all of it, was never entirely selfless. That somewhere inside all of that generosity was a person who needed to be needed. Because being needed was safer than being seen. And believe me, that's a harder thing to sit with than just calling yourself a good person and moving on. There was a version of me that would have kept going indefinitely. Kept showing up because the alternative was sitting alone with a version of myself I hadn't properly met yet. That's a specific fear that doesn't get named honestly enough. Being needed is a transaction you can control. Being known is something that can be taken from you. And if your whole survival system was built around not losing people, then the idea of being truly known, without the usefulness and the performance, that's terrifying in a way that availability never is. But you cannot spend your whole life making yourself useful to everyone and then wonder why you feel like a stranger to yourself. The clarity you've been giving away to whoever needed it, it came from what you've actually lived through. From the weight of your own damage and everything you built from it. At some point you have to decide what to do with that. Whether you keep distributing it to people who take it and disappear, or whether you finally turn it on to the one person who needed it first and never asked. And believe me, I'm still working on that. And if you're honest with yourself right now, so are you.